Hello class, welcome to section 5.2, exploiting wireless vulnerabilities. In the previous section, we talked about exploiting network vulnerabilities, and this section will be more specifically about your wireless protocols like the WPA, which you use for Wi-Fi security. Let's go to jump into it. So, overview, customers are concerned about the security of their Wi-Fi networks, as they should be. As I mentioned, a lot more people are becoming more aware and less trusting of just basic protocols, and the abuse of Wi-Fi networks are becoming more widespread as people start to figure out how to actually A, crack these networks, and then B, people are obviously now trying to figure out how to protect them. So it's kind of a game of cat and mouse. So because wireless signals can be received outside of facilities, Wi-Fi networks are pretty much considered internal, right? So it's not very common for a company to only have land cables on computers. You're going to be moving around to different meeting rooms, you're going to have your tablet, you're going to have your laptop. So the facilities typically now have Wi-Fi. So those Wi-Fis are treated as internal networks, right? Because that's where all the people, the engineers, whoever are working on them, but they can bleed outside of the actual facility due to how signals work. So it is essential to periodically verify the effectiveness of Wi-Fi security, right? Because you can't control the signals going out unless you're building your building in a particular way that absorbs Wi-Fi signals. Some more secure areas do this, but for the typical use case, Wi-Fi networks now are pretty much essential to everyday business, and they can bleed outside of those buildings. So not directly to Wi-Fi, but equally crucial is the strengthened network access security so that an attacker can gain access to the wireless network. They still cannot gain sensitive resources. So this is saying, again, we need to actually have access control in terms of what people can reach on a Wi-Fi network. So your internal network can have, internet access, but maybe have an even deeper internal network that might be LAN rather than wireless that can't be accessed unless you're physically in the building and plugged in somewhere, right? So even if they get into your outer Wi-Fi network, they can't get into your inner sensitive resource network. Okay, so rogue access points. This is pretty much where physical security comes into to prevent this from happening. But someone can walk into a building, drop a Wi-Fi box, plug it in, and then there you go. They walk outside, go in their car, and watch the traffic. So often you're going to see these at airports. You're going to see these at cafes. Never connect to anything that says free internet or really any internet points that are not secured or locked, unless you see that it's specifically listed on like a sign or something. But there have been cases where people will go in cafes and put up a little sign that says free Wi-Fi or whatever. The employees don't notice; they just think someone else did it, and that's someone else's rogue access point or their actual router, and they just sit and collect data. That's less common now. Starbucks in particular is more active about checking to make sure that's not happening. But again, the average lunch rush customer is not going to really pay too much attention. They're going to sit down and their phones also pop up. It's a very annoying feature in Apple that I dislike, at least on my iPhone. Every time there's a free Wi-Fi network, my iPhone's always trying to go to it because it wants to take me off my data to save data or whatever. But it's actually very frustrating because I don't want to connect to these random Wi-Fi networks, right? Again, be very careful on what you connect to. So an evil twin attack using a rogue AP, the attacker creates a rogue AP or access point and configures it in the same as the existing corporate network. So basically, they're just trying to mirror it. As you see here, the SSID is CorpNet, SSID is CorpNet. They're just trying to pretty much make a duplicate as far as they can, or as close as they can, and people are like, oh, well, I need it, again, that Starbucks Wi-Fi, right? So if it just says Starbucks Wi-Fi, and they literally create an access point that also is called Starbucks Wi-Fi and has the same password, some people might connect to that, some people might connect to the real one. The point being is some people are going to be going through this rogue access point. So this can also, to get a closer mirror, you can do some DNS cache poisoning to redirect to your access point. There's a few other exploits that you can actually do to make your evil twin attack more effective. We talked about a few of those in the previous section. So disassociation or deauthentication attacks, so deauth attacks is typically kind of what you call it. This type of attack is when you either perform a denial of service, DOS, condition or to make those clients connect to an evil twin. So you're pretty much going to force a disassociation with the original, say, CorpNet, or what do they call it? Yeah, CorpNet, and then the device is going to be like, oh, well, I want to go to the SSID, right? The service set identifier. It's the name of the wireless network. Oh, I want to go back to CorpNet, except now it's going to connect to the rogue AP because the rogue AP is closer or has a stronger signal or whatever it's using to determine what it wants to connect to. So you de-auth them from one, and then they re-authenticate onto your rogue AP or your evil twin. So tools such as Airmon NG are part of the Aircrack NG suite. The Aircrack suite is really cool. Maybe in module 10, we'll have a chance to actually do a lab on it because there's no lab for it for this section, just because there's already been a lot of information and reading. So there's not going to be a lab for the Aircrack suite, unfortunately, but it is really cool. I will put it in the supplemental content because I do think you should become familiar with it. You're going to see this used a whole bunch in this section because it pretty much has all these tools that are used for de-auth attacks or evil twin attacks or cracking, password attacks. They're all part of the Aircrack NG suite. So it's a very powerful suite to be familiar with because you will probably be using it if you are doing vulnerability testing on any wireless networks. So the AirDump NG tool, also part, as I mentioned, part of the Aircrack NG suite, can be used to sniff and analyze network traffic. So you can go ahead and watch the association process, the probes, which are looking for that SSID. And then, of course, you're providing your fake SSID or your evil twin SSID. So you use it to sniff the network IDs, figure out which SSIDs, even if they're hidden, right? If they're not publicly listed, you can still grab them using the this tool. And then eventually catch a client, try and associate with the AP, and then you can get the SSID, right? So now you have it. You can start creating your evil twin. Just keep moving. So a de-auth attack can be performed using the AirPlay NG utility. Example illustrated here. So let's just go over really quick. So 802.11w, so 802.11 is the wireless IEEE standards, defines the management frame protection MFP feature. It protects wireless devices against spoofed management frames. So these are the things that you use for a de-auth attack. You use these management frames to pretty much tell it to de-authenticate a client. In other words, MFP helps defend against de-auth attacks, right? So MFP is negotiated between the wireless client, the supplicant, and the wireless infrastructure device. This is your router, your access point, and whatever you're connecting to, or your hotspot on your phone. So preferred network list attacks, you probably see this all the time when you walk into your home. Your phone already is authenticated, you're on your Wi-Fi, right? So most operating systems and wireless supplicants clients like your phone or your laptop or even your desktop if it's wirelessly connected maintain a list of trusted or preferred networks. The list is called the PNL or the preferred network list. A PNL includes the SSID, a plain text password, or the actual WEP or WPA passwords. So clients use these preferred networks to automatically connect. Like I said, you walk into your house, there you go. So it's possible for attackers to listen to the client requests and impersonate the wireless networks to make the clients connect to the attacker's wireless devices. So if they have the same SSID and they have it set that, so if they somehow have your plaintext password, we'll say, if you walk next to that, the PNL will pick up, oh, there's that SSID I like. It's going to automatically try to apply this password to that SSID and then connect, right? So they can use that to eavesdrop or even trick you into joining their rogue access point or network. So wireless signal jamming and interference. Jamming networks and signal jamming of any kind is generally illegal. I don't know if there's any legal kind of jamming, so be very careful when you are doing any, say, lab testing that you're not jamming other wireless networks because that's a crime. The purpose of jamming wireless signals is to cause interference or for a full or partial denial of service. So jamming typically used for DOS attacks and to take down a wireless network, right? So if successful, is very disruptive because it'll take down the entire network. Nothing can associate, no data can flow through a network. It pretty much bricks the entire thing, right? So there's a lot of implementations, built-in features that look for these kind of attacks. Again, signal jamming is pretty uncommon as it's it's a big no-no and something that, the police actually go after people if there's suspected jamming. They have these devices they can walk around with, kind of when they used to look for the TV signals back in the day. they can use that to see a whole bunch of static and pretty much walk to the source. So in order to jam a Wi-Fi signal or any type of radio communication, you just generate noise. So you're just pretty much sending tons and tons of nothing, but making sure it's on the same frequency as wireless network. Pretty much all wireless networks operate within the same frequency band. Bluetooth operates in their frequency band, and radios operate in their frequency band, right? So if you're trying to take down a radio signal, you spam noise in that frequency, Wi-Fi that frequency, Bluetooth that frequency, and so on and so forth. So war driving, again, a lot of people would just pop up their Wi-Fi, their new router out of the box, and then just let it go. They leave it the default credentials. Again, misconfiguration is the cause of a lot of these problems. But their neighbor's not gonna bother them, right? They've known them for 80 years or however long they live there. War driving is where someone's driving around in a car or walking. You can walk too. And you're scanning around your phone to pick up SSIDs, right? So if you find an SSID that doesn't have protection, say it's just like the Brown's house, and it's no security or weak security, and now you have their SSID, you can even maybe connect to their network and start listening in from your car, or now a more popular way, because there's always the risk that there's a Ring camera or something, someone's watching, you report it to the police. A lot of people are actually taking drones and they're putting their rogue access points on the bottom of the drones and flying them over and using that to grab wireless network SSIDs, as well as eavesdrop on wireless connections. So be careful if you see someone flying a drone over the top of your house. Make sure you're protected from that too. So initialization vector or IV attacks and unsecured wireless protocols. So an attacker can cause some modification on the initialization vector, I'm just going to say IV, because that's quite the mouthful, of a wireless packet that is encrypted during transmission. So this one's a little more technical, similar to some of the other attacks, so just try to stay with me here. So the goal is to obtain a lot of information about the plain text of one packet. So if they can get the plain text of a single packet, or the IV, right, the initialization, then they can go ahead and use that to decrypt all the other packets they've already collected. So WEP is susceptible to many different attacks, including IV, so it's considered obsolete. So if that IV is unencrypted, it's still going to use that same prepend, which says here uses a 24-bit IV, which is prepended to the pre-shared key, right? So this is plain, and this is secured. The problem is you're always going to have the first, I think it's 4 bits or so. I think it's in the next slide. In plain text, and if you collect enough of those, you can kind of figure out what the pre-shared key is through the AirCrack suite. There's a thing that does it automatically. So WEP uses RC4, which this is an encryption algorithm that's also considered generally obsolete. It's still usable, but it's very, old. Again, you should be using more robust encryption like SHA, the SHA-256 or SHA-2. So if you are still having WEP on any access points, you should definitely pull it off, because there's a plethora of issues with it. So anyway, when WEP uses RC4 to encrypt a packet, it prepends, which means puts on the front of the packet the IV to the secret key before including the key in the RC4. So this is what's going to set up the handshake or the encryption, right? This is our pretty much our starting number that we're injecting into our algorithm. The problem is this is not secured. So if you have this, you can eventually guess the actual pre-shared key. So so it's the first 3 bytes of the allegedly secret key used on every packet, because it's prepended on every packet. So to recover it, they just need to collect enough data from the air. With all of that data, they eventually run it, as you see, the airmon-ng, and then they can crack the pre-shared key. So AirPlay-ng, so you listen to the ARP request and then replay or inject them back into the wireless network. So here's an example of how to use it. Then use AirCrack-ng to crack the WEP pre-shared key, as you see here, using the captured packets, the injected packets we did with AirPlay. And then after it cracks or recovers the pre-shared key, the output in the example on the side is displayed, right? So here we go, we found the key, this is the key. And then, so it's the highlighted line. So WPA and WPA2 are susceptible to different vulnerabilities. WPA2, obviously created as a successor for WPA, was supposed to patch a lot of these vulnerabilities. WPA really didn't have for saying it's Wi-Fi protected access, they didn't actually have very many good security features. It was a very, very, very simple protocol that just really was used for, say, at home. Again, we weren't really expecting our neighbors to break into our Wi-Fi. We just needed enough security that, you know, they can't just like stumble into our network. And it's more of just to keep people, from just accidentally associating to the wrong network, right? WPA2 patched a ton of these vulnerabilities and actually started to have a focus on security, but it was just the starting step in the right direction. We're now up to WPA3. Many wireless professionals recommend WPA3 because this is actually, they've really taken a step back and said, okay, let's create a secure protocol that's actually designed in a way that people can feel safe no matter where they are, not just like safe enough, right? So this is definitely a more robust iteration of it. Of course, it still has problems. No protocol is perfect, but it actually has a focus on security rather than just a focus on connection. So they support different authentication methods, including pre-shared key. This is probably the most common that you're going to be doing. So WPA is not susceptible to IB attacks that affect WEP. However, it is possible to capture the WPA four-way handshake between a client. So here is the example here, and wireless infrastructure, and then brute force it because the encryption is not strong enough on the pre-shared key from WPA. Again, this was created to be secure. It didn't really have enough of a focus on security, as well as they didn't expect, I guess, attackers to be as savvy as they are. So WPA succeeds WEP because WEP was poorly implemented. Then WPA is not considered secure enough, so we get the second one, which patches a bunch of holes, and then WPA3 really actually takes an overview and starts to kind of change some of these, this connection handshakes into ways that are really, really hard to crack. So here is the steps for this kind of attack. An attacker monitors Wi-Fi network and finds clients connected to CorpNet, right? So we figured out by listening to the traffic that there is an access point called CorpNet. The attacker sends deauth packets, so we're going to drop this client off of the wireless access point. Then the attacker captures the WPA4i handshake, so when we deauth here, it's going to attempt to reconnect, right? That's when that four-way handshake shown here is going to fire again to re-authenticate. Then we're listening at that point, so we actually get to listen to the four-way handshake, and then we crack the pre-shared key. Bing, bingo, we're in. The following steps show how to perform this attack using the aircrack. So this is how you actually do it. Do it yourself if you want to try. The attacker starts listening using the airmon, right? And then we're going to have the output come here so that we can put the output of this interface we're listening to. This is what we're going to eventually use to crack. And then after locating the CorpNet network, so we've listened to the, on airmon, right? We've listened to this interface. We figured out what the SSID is. We capture all of it here from the dump. And then obviously we're choosing channel 11, and then we're choosing the interface WLAN, so moving forward. So then we airplay command as shown in the figure to perform a deauth attack. So we're deauthing our client. And then in the terminal shown at the top of the figure, you can see the attacker has collected the handshake that happened after the deauth attack went through, right? Because it re-authenticated back onto the network. So then we use the aircrack, which is the actual recovery of the pre-shared key, using that file that we had collected. And the file name is words in this example. So it takes a while because encryption takes a while to break. It's just doing tons and tons of complicated math. So you might wonder, well, what makes an encryption algorithm obsolete? Sometimes because there's actually problems with it, which are very complicated and we don't want to go into. But sometimes it's, as you can see, it only took it around, looks like 17 seconds to crack, which is not very long at all. But what makes one obsolete is these keys, the math problems are very complicated, don't get me wrong, but computers have gotten so fast nowadays, the CPUs run so much faster than they used to do even 10 years ago. The thing that took 10 years now takes 10 minutes, right? So we have to keep, it's kind of a race against the actual quality of our technology, especially the commonly had technology, because even the most secure algorithms, if you have enough time, you can break them. So if you have some nuclear powered quantum computer in some black site, it doesn't really matter if you have, SHA-2 or your, WPA3, etc., eventually you're going to actually be able to crack these encryption algorithms. So what's important to remember is the encryption should only last long enough, right, the time it would take, so that the data becomes obsolete by the time they get it. So if you're encrypting a token to log into a website, the time it takes to log in and authenticate that token is what, a few milliseconds? So even if I'm sending my, trying to crack that and I eventually get the actual token itself, it doesn't matter because the token's already been spent. And as long as you didn't do it in the 17 milliseconds, I'm good, right? That's why it's important that, a lot of different services don't re-accept tokens. They require new tokens every time because we want our encryption to last as long as the data is important, to say the least. So key reinstallation attack is a series of vulnerabilities that affect WPA and WPA2. As I said, WPA was supposed to fix a lot of the WEP problems, and it didn't. WPA2 was supposed to fix a lot of the WPA problems, and it still needed a lot more work. It was almost kind of rushed out to just kind of plug some of the WPA holes before WPA3 was fully introduced. So exploitations depend on specific device config. As I mentioned, misconfiguration is a primary issue with any of these kind of networks. It's very important that your networks are configured correctly and securely, because a lot of these vulnerabilities take advantage of people who don't know what they're doing, right? So eventually, if you successfully exploit it, it'll allow unauthenticated attackers to reinstall previously used encryption or integrity key, depending on the specific vulnerability. And then once the key has been successfully reinstalled, the older one, an attacker may proceed to capture traffic, use the reinstall key, and attempt to decrypt such traffic, right? So if it's almost like a downgrade attack in a way. They're putting you back to an older key that they might already have access to. That key is starting to then be used to encrypt traffic, and then they listen to that traffic, and since they already have the other side of the key, they can break it, right? So most wireless vendors have provided patches, so the cracked vulnerabilities are generally patched for newer devices. WPA3 also addresses these for older devices, at least that can run WPA3. But as you see, there are a ton of vulnerabilities in all of these protocols, so your data is never completely safe. That's why we want our encryption to last long enough that while the data is relevant, it's encrypted, and when it's no longer relevant, it doesn't matter, right? So, as it says, no technology or protocol is perfect. No person is perfect, despite what your significant others might tell you. So just be aware of that. There's always going to be holes in every infrastructure. That's why we like defense in depth, which means putting layers of security, right? So several vulnerabilities have been discovered in WPA3. I'm sure they're already working on WPA4, right? So frag attacks, which stands for fragmentation and aggregation attacks, is what we're going to go into in this next slide. Or it's right after this one. So Karma attacks attack radio machines automatically. It's an on-path, which we learned in our previous section is in the middle of the two, the client and the server, or the client and the target. So it involves creating a rogue AP, so a fake, access point, and allowing the attacker to intercept that wireless traffic. Radio machine could be a mobile device, laptop, anything with, a radio antenna. In a Karma attack scenario, the attacker listens for the probe request, which is when they're asking who has this SSID, and then it generates the same SSID that's because it sees something looking like, oh, hey, where's the Brown's house ID? Where is it? And then it sees, oh, someone's looking for that SSID. It generates that same SSID and says, oh, here I am. And then it connects, and now you're on a rogue AP, right? So fragmentation attacks can be used to acquire 1,500 bytes of pseudo-random generation algorithm. So pseudo-random, we don't want it to actually be completely random. Why? Because then we're not going to actually be able to predict the numbers that come out, so it's going to cause problems for our handshake. So we need it to be pseudo-random, right? It needs to be random enough, but it needs to be a predictable random that we can actually recreate, right, to recreate a key. So that's why it's considered pseudo-random. Wireless fragmentation attacks can be launched against WEP configured devices. These attacks do not recover the WEP key itself, so it's not giving the pre-shared key, but it gives wireless injections to break the WEP network itself, right? So credential harvesting, we talked about this a little bit in Module 4, which is the social engineering. So credential harvesting is when they're grabbing a whole bunch of credentials. So typically they're going to send fake emails out and have them enter into that Amazon account that, or click that link, and it looks like the Amazon login page, but really it's just going to send their credentials to, you know, whoever the bad actor is. Also, the wireless AP or captive portal. So sometimes if you've used public Wi-Fi, you'll see the little pop-up thing. It says, hey, log in to use Wi-Fi, enter your email, etc. So they'll have you pretty much auto-join some open access point. Says, oh, enter your email, thanks. And enter your email and your birthday or whatever, right? Now they have your email and your birthday, and they can maybe try to use that for impersonating as well. So we used Ettercap in the previous lab, or you should have, so you can kind of see how you can spoof a DNS reply and convert them to your website, the fake website that you are using to collect your credential harvesting. And then another tool that enables that attack is Social Engineering Toolkit. We also use that, right? So you're familiar. So bluejacking and blue snarfing, always creative with the naming. Bluejacking attacks are specifically when you're attacking a Bluetooth local network, right? So it's done using the Object Exchange Protocol, and typically you're sending someone like a V card, so you're, you know, the name, the phone number, the email, and website URLs. So you might be sending, if you're, say, walking by people, so you can see it's the type of attack mostly performed for spam. So if you're if you're in the airport or a music park, you're walking by and then you're spamming, you're bluejacking all these open Bluetooth connections, which is why it's important to keep your Bluetooth antenna off and only connect to things you know. You send them a whole bunch of cards that say, I don't know, it can be like Disney employee or something, and you want a free trip to Disney, click this link, and then obviously it's going to link to something more nefarious. Or even if they just message back, who is this? And now you have a valid number, and you add that number to, you know, whatever spam call list you want to, right? So blue snarfing attacks are performed to obtain unauthorized access. So an attacker can launch attacks to access the calendars, contact lists, so they can grab more information for other people, for more spamming, emails and text messages, pictures and videos, right? So these can be sometimes very sensitive. So it's important, again, not to actually connect to anything Bluetooth related unless you absolutely know what it is. It's more dangerous because rather than just spamming out data, which can't be followed back to, this is actually creating a connection so that they can transmit data to one another. So again, this is more trackable and leaves a fingerprint of, you know, who did it. So then once they get the IMEI, which is the number that's used for redirecting calls to yours, they can then divert those calls to themselves or whatever call device they're trying to. So as you can see, there's a lot of information they can grab just by sneaking onto your Bluetooth network, right? So RFID attacks, we talked about this a little bit in physical security. RFID badges are used all the time. There's active and passive ones. You've probably seen active ones. An example would be similar to an Apple AirTag. Those are active. They have a battery. They're able to send out signals themselves. Passive ones are off until they actually reach a reader where near field communication will actually power them. And then once they're powered, they turn on and send out their ID, right? So these are very popular because especially passive RFID tags, you can store information on them and you don't have to power them. You just can walk by and scan it, and there you go. There you have whatever inventory information you need. So there's some low frequency ones. These ones are typically you'll see for those inventory management because you don't really need to see all the boxes. You just want the one nearby. And then high frequency ones, which, you know, are things like the Apple AirTag because you want to have kind of a small field around you if it's on a bag or something, right? So Bluetooth low energy attacks. Many IoT devices use Bluetooth low energy. So this is, again, how you can turn your lights on and off with your phone. Bluetooth communications are susceptible on path because typically these low energy communications aren't encrypted or secured in any way. So if someone is somehow in between you and your smart lamp or whatever you're connecting to on Bluetooth, they can intercept it. Of course, they can also deny a service if they're spamming the noise into that near field communication. And then, as you see, Ohio State University have discovered different fingerprinting attacks that can allow an attacker to reveal design flaws and misconfigurations in BLE devices. That's pretty much they're going to be able to check the configuration of that smart lamp and see, what kind of vulnerabilities it has. So moving forward more on RFID attacks, ultra high frequency, so the bigger ranged ones can do, so this is even further than a high frequency RFID tag. They can do it up to 30 feet. So attackers can silently steal the information with an RFID reader, because RFID is just broadcasting out, right? It's just broadcasting, this is my ID, this is my ID, right? So this is kind of where you've seen an uptick on people buying wallets that have RFID shields. You want to put those in so that if someone's walking around with the Proxmark 3, they're not going to pick up your RFID tags. Then, of course, you can clone badges. So if you have a badge to get into your building and you're not in a RFID protected shield, you walk by, they walk by you, they grab it, and then they try to make their fake versions, badge in, and walk into your office building, right? You can even use an antenna to pick it up, especially for these ultra high frequency ones, because if you're far enough and you have the antenna pointed correctly, you can actually grab even near field communication, which is pretty crazy that they can be that far away. So yeah, they can grab the small amounts of data, such as passwords and encryption keys, because NFC, again, is not typically encrypted because it's so close. It's just a quick communication. So if they're listening on this antenna, they're going to get that plain text password or plain text encryption key. So password spraying, this is after you do credential harvesting. Typically, you're going to get, as many people's usernames as you can. Then you're going to apply that username to as many different devices as you can with default passwords. So many of you have changed your username on Kali. Cool. Some of you haven't. I don't know what your passwords are, but many people leave the password as Kali, right? So if that was a real VM in a production environment, if they can get a list of usernames, a list of names that work there, they can spray the password Kali with every username they can on every host they found, right? So that eventually, if they break into one, there you go. And then credential stuffing is similar. It's these are the usernames and passwords that have already been leaked. So if you have this password on one of your favorite websites, that website gets hacked, the password gets compromised. What they do is after that's posted somewhere, they take it and they use the same username and password across as many websites as they can: Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, whatever other accounts that they are wanting to gain access to. This is why you're told never to reuse passwords, because if that password and username ever gets compromised, it allows credential stuffing, right? So exploit chaining. Most sophisticated attacks leverage multiple vulnerabilities to compromise systems. As we just went over a ton of different attacks for both wired networks and wireless networks, typically you have one way in, you have another way to actually break something or to gain control of something, and then you escalate yourself past that, etc. Most attackers will be chaining multiple exploits. It's typically not just one exploit will let you take over an entire company. You have to exploit their, HVAC system, and then from the HVAC system, you're going to exploit their internal network, and from their internal network, you're going to data exfiltrate using a different exploitation, right? So patching all of these is important, because typically if you have a few holes, they can be sewn together to create, a massive attack chain. So we're going to go into the summary real quick. What did you learn? A lot, hopefully. There was a ton of different attacks. I would very much take time to read over the summary to help remind you, of all of these attacks on your own. I'm not going to just reiterate all of these, because then we're going to be here for another hour. But mainly, you're learning protocols for identification do have vulnerabilities. Those vulnerabilities can be taken advantage of to gain access to very common protocols, DNS, NetBIOS, right? Operations using certain ports. We learned about that in vulnerability scanning. There's Puppy, an open source Python cross-platform remote admin tool. Again, some of these phone hackers even get people to install this themselves so that they can do remote aid for you. And then Eternal Blue exploit is, there's not enough time to go over it in all of these lectures. I posted this in the supplemental content. Read about it. It's important. Read about WannaCry. It was pretty much one of the biggest outbreaks of commercially used, I guess commercially is not the great word for it, but yeah, commercial commercial used devices getting hit with ransomware, and it was a huge issue. Someone you might know could have been affected by it if they've ever downloaded really anything during those time periods. WannaCry was everywhere. Eternal Blue, the exploit, I don't know if I mentioned this in the previous lecture, but it was actually pretty much proven that the NSA was using this to break into people's computers, and then this NSA exploit got leaked, and then the bad actors used this leak exploit to create, the WannaCry as well as Nieta, a lot of other ransomware. So this was an NSA discovery that they didn't tell people because they were using it, right? And they caused a lot of problems and a lot of pain because they didn't tell people, but that's just kind of the nature, I guess, of their positions. They find exploits and they don't let people know. So moving forward, we talked about redirecting people via DNS poisoning to your fake Amazon website, the different protocol that's used for managing network devices, and how you can use this to change configs, to downgrade attack, to make it easier to break in. Again, there's a lot of phishing and email-based attacks if they're doing open relay, which means as soon as they receive an email, it fires out to everyone. So if they find an open relay mail server, then it gets sent to everybody. Everybody gets a link to win a $500 gift card, right? So Nmap, we've used a little bit in the labs, some commands that you also used in the labs here, as well as we talked about some of the best hashing protocols. MD5 and SHA-1 are both considered debunked, especially MD5. It has a ton of issues, so moving to better hashing, such as the SHA-2 family, so SHA-256, etc. FTP servers, we talked about how to do data exfiltration using these anonymous logins, and that's typically how the data ends up being stolen ultimately. It's not like someone's in the building with a USB drive waiting for it to all download. So again, best practices, use stronger passwords. You see this all the time, but it is important, especially with technology continuing to get better. It's faster and faster and faster at brute forcing passwords. Lock down admin accounts. They shouldn't have access to them remotely typically, and then admin accounts themselves should be removed from devices if they're not being used. And then, yeah, patch everything, patch everything, patch everything. Patch the hash, we talked about a whole bunch of different attackers here. We talked about the silver ticket and golden ticket exploits in Kerberos. On-path attacks, or man in the middle, is what it used to be called. If you've been in another class, I know this nomenclature is kind of taking over now, but yeah, some of you might be more familiar with man in the middle. So it's someone in between two devices and steal and manipulate data. You can go ahead and do MAC spoofing, pretending you're the actual device, and manipulating STP. So again, you're in between the two devices and pretty much just tricking the communication to go through you, right? So best practices, honestly, the most important thing of these, each section of these attacks is to read the best practices and we'll say not memorize them, but write them down at least. Because these are all good advice to, again, a client tells you come hard in my network. Well, what do? You start by doing access control lists. You turn off ports that aren't being used, right? Root guards, implementing the IEEE standards, etc. So more different attacks. We've talked about DDoS and how it can take down entire businesses and servers. We talked about the Christmas Lizard Squad attack on the PlayStation Network, the different kind of DOS attacks and how they're used, and how different ways you can navigate yourself through a virtual LAN. And then rogue access points, evil twin, and disassociation we just went over in 5.2. Setting up your own Wi-Fi network in Starbucks, calling it free Wi-Fi, and collecting everybody's credit card information or whatever they're doing on their searching. And then to defend, again, this is kind of the best practice. Use packet filtering, use cryptographic protocols that are secure, not old, and then obviously spoofing detection features, which are typically built into newer network devices. So again, here are all the different attacks we talked about in the wireless. Again, war driving or war flying, which is definitely more of a new thing you see with drones everywhere, as they're pretty cheap and widespread. And then, yeah, different attacks you use to break and steal the pre-shared key and eventually take over, or at least listen in on wireless networks. The different ways you can abuse Bluetooth, using bluejacking, blue snarfing, Password spraying, again, don't use the same password for multiple sites because they will use credential stuffing and find your username and password that was leaked somewhere and then send it against all your other accounts. And that's typically how you're like, well, how did they guess my password? Well, if it's a reused one, that's typically how they do it. And then exploit chaining or sophisticated attacks. Again, these are the kind of attacks you're going to see that are going to take down places like Target, take down places like a bank or a credit card company. It's typically a 0-day vulnerability. What is 0-day? Just in case you don't know, 0-day means it's not a known vulnerability. So it has no patches, right? It is something that was discovered typically by the attacker. So 0-day vulnerabilities are pretty much impossible to defend against. However, what you want to be able to defend against is the chaining, right? So the 0-day might be the way they get in because your outside is we'll say it's nearly perfectly constructed, but you couldn't expect a 0-day because again, it was unknown. They use that to break through your wall. That's why you use defense in depth, so that when a 0-day vulnerability is found and abused, at least we stop them somewhere else. We have another checkpoint somewhere before they break into even further, right? Yeah. So here are some of the reflection questions you might see as a reflection, and that is it for 5.2 and Module 5 entirely. So see you in the next module.